So it's now or never, folks. We don't have a set of questions. We don't have a title for this even, right? So I think it's, you lot are up, right? Anything you ever wanted to ask about funding, now's your chance, okay? I think it's the only way you're going to keep you guys awake as well. And I think they're here to be grilled. You've got everything. You've got all the funding, questions and expertise up there that you could ever want. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that, but we can make it interactive. You haven't had that many chances or that long today to actually think about questions. And funding is usually provocative enough to elicit some interest. Think about that. It's been sort of on my mind all day that the success that the HRC have had in shaping the environment so that NIHR responded with an uplift in funding. So when there's really good work out there, the funders can see that and they can expand and you guys were alluding to that. But so going from, I don't know, what was it, 1.2 million from the MIC and the DEC to 3 million over 5 years is pretty cool. And that provides infrastructure to do a lot of really, really good work with a lot of important companies who can grow. If David and V wanted to set themselves a target that for the 5 years after this award, they're not going to be operating on 3 million, they're going to be operating on 30 million, right? So they want to move that decimal point. And I'll talk about NIHR writing really, really big checks, but suppose that they were to expand the horizons to say, we need infrastructure at a different scale here in Leeds to work with companies and really change the economic environment for all of that cluster. And we need the capacity to do that. So they have to move it from 3 million to 30 million. Where would those sources of funding need to be? And I'm going to start with Gritstone on this.
I guess where Gritstone fits in that story is if you've got to show impact, we would be part of the impact story. Yeah. So we're not going to be investing in that sort of thing, but we might invest in businesses that are born of that activity. So the more that we can demonstrate, and our whole reason for being is to say, look, there are great people, great IP generation, there's a real opportunity to do more of the good stuff that happens in the north. Yeah. If we can catalyse more of that and point to businesses that have grown high value jobs, created wealth in the region, then that's the bit of the jigsaw puzzle that we might play in terms of giving you the tools to then go back to other funding bodies and say, please do more of this because it is working.
Absolutely. It is working. So demonstrating the effect is really important, but also that some of the investment can be used to work with the types of projects that we've seen here. So,
absolutely. Yeah. So I think what's come across from everybody, so we've worked with Innovate on the investor-sponsored kind of opportunities. It takes a whole lot of collaboration to make all these different elements work, and so we just want part of that ecosystem. But our focus is on
absolutely grow the company, invest in the companies. Yeah, spot on. Richard, you anything?
Yeah, so from a product development perspective, I think that it would be good if there was a larger portfolio for smaller funds. So from a product development perspective, innovation and R&D has got a large amount of risk. And I think that where funding perhaps is needed more is those early stage startups. Those bootstrapped individuals or organisations that need that kind of first leg up on that journey. Mm-hmm. So I would say maybe a portfolio around TRL 1 to 3, because I think once you've demonstrated proof of concept, then you start to get some traction. But there's always that early stage, and we have it when we work with clinicians and surgeons at a very early stage. They're trying to get that first foothold. Yeah. But ironically, when you do get the foothold and you've demonstrated the principle, then you've got kind of traction. So early stage, I would say.
Thank you, Richard. David, in terms of a consultant, and you recognise the clinical need, but also as someone who's in the thick of doing research and evaluation in this environment, what types of infrastructure would that 30 million be invested in? What would we do more of as a system?
I think from the clinical side, probably need more research capacity within the NHS. So actually, you come to people and ask for a product evaluation of 20 patients as a proof of concept, but there's quite a lot of work that goes around that in terms of regulatory requirements and set up within the hospital and then delivering that with patients. So I think we would certainly benefit from some enhancement in research delivery capacity within services that are engaging.
Yeah. Any progress on questions from the floor? Oh, good. Right. V, could you... Sorry. She's a star. She really is. Multi-talented V. Yeah.
This is probably one for Mark and maybe Chris as well. But so if a company comes to you and their whole business model is based around selling into the NHS, what is it that you look for? I realise this is a very broad question. What is it that you look for, like key things as part of what they put in place or what they've done already as part of making an investment decision into them?
So probably the rather disappointing answer is going to be we probably wouldn't back a business whose sole reason for being was to develop products for the NHS. It's a simple thing, isn't it? I was listening to the conversations this morning, and I think a great addition to the ecosystem, which would ultimately help feed products back into the NHS, is to have people in this ecosystem who can help you develop plans for getting into the US system. Because to raise the money to develop some of those really innovative products, you're going to have to sell that plan to the later stage investors. That's, if you don't have a plan for the largest healthcare market in the world, then you're going to struggle, is my personal view. So, very short answer is, I think just having that very tight focus probably isn't going to overly excite some of the larger VCs. Having a clear idea as how you address your home market is a really sensible thing to do. So I don't think it's either or, it's additive, right? So I think if you come along understanding, it's a lot easier to get all the touch points in your local ecosystem, isn't it? So if you don't understand that, I'd be a bit surprised. But if you do, that's not necessarily enough. Is that...
Yeah, that's probably the same answer for me. Again, partly we don't we have independent assessors, so it's a peer review process, so we don't tend to do that. But clearly, part of the marking is what's your market, and if it's the NHS, which is 2 to 3% of the world market, then that's not going to be a huge thing. But again, if you can start with the NHS, if you can sell to the NHS, if you can start your home area, that obviously helps. But again, I talked to a lot of companies, and again, everyone's going to America, to the point that actually, we certainly in the sort of regulatory space, we're thinking about FDA and C marking. Where do we put some money in? Companies don't really want to do Europe when it comes to that sort of stuff. So all the companies, literally, the 100 companies I talk to a year, the FDA, America, and so that's 99%, to be honest.
I guess it's interesting because it means then that with the people you've got the breadth of funding here, but you've got people within the NHS who say, oh, I've got a great idea, but it's based around a structure that they're aware of and the challenges that they're aware of in the structure. They're getting the early stage funding. I knew that would be your answers, and I was kind of curious where there seems to be a bit of a gap here, and that's the kind of the real question, I guess. You've got people within the NHS developing, they're getting the early stage funding, but actually the later stage investment is slightly mismatched there.
Any of the panel want to take that one?
So a good example of that will be the clinical entrepreneur program, who are clinicians in the NHS solving problems that they see every day. What is interesting is the ones that have been most successful of those are going global. So they're not. It's not just a UK market that they've got. So they're able to develop. They usually find this just because if it works in the NHS, they might not tweak it a bit. But the problems are pretty much common to most healthcare systems around the world. It's worth saying, obviously, NIHR. We are funded by the Department of Health and Social Care, so you'd anticipate one of the key reasons why we're here is for the NHS. I have to say we're incredibly pragmatic. At least certainly we are in Eye for Eye. You aren't going to survive as a company while you're waiting to try and get into the NHS. So you need to find some way of making some money otherwise. And so most of our companies, we're actually starting to see now, probably for the first time in the last round, people actually saying, we're going to the US market first. We've had a few of those, but now it's becoming much more common. 2 things driving that. Obviously, one is the speed at which you can get into the NHS. The second one is the regulatory environment, which is at least stable. You know what you're getting into in the US. It's not any easier necessarily, but at least you know what you've got.
Thanks, Ian. There's one more there from
Sorry, can I just follow up on that? I always feel a bit guilty because I've actually backed a couple of people out of the Clinical Entrepreneurs Programme. It always feels a little bit like we're stealing innovation from the, from the NHS. But it's a superb programme. But both those businesses, exactly to your point, one was augmented reality for sort of surgical training, and the other one was conversational AI for, again, for training. And the point I want to make is, one, they were really driven, impressive individuals, so kudos to that programme. They were definitely focused on overseas markets early on. But the other nice point to say is, like, when you're trying to get investment, sometimes there's a lot of investors that are nervous of how complicated, complex, challenging this sort of space is, because it's regulated, it's got long development programs, and all that sort of, it's capital intensive. But both those businesses actually weren't regulated products. So there are investment opportunities if you want to have some exposure to the sort of surgical space that are in aligned kind of market opportunities. So I would recommend thinking about those things. They thought quite carefully about how quickly they could move, what the right product was, and thinking about that whole, do we have to challenge the regulatory piece or can we do something else? So.
Okay, thanks, guys. We'll just move on to the next question. Do you want to say who you are?
Yeah, my name is Muslim. I'm one of the clinical fellows in cardiothoracic surgery in Manchester. Being a surgical trainee and with the surgical realm, many of us has nice ideas, brilliant ideas, you never know. And I know that the CEP, Clinical Entrepreneurship Program, provides a good hub for that. But how about the idea of starting to develop a concept about something? How can you get funding to develop things? So going to a company or within academia, initially you need some budget for your medical device or digital health technology that you want to build. What's the best way or stream to go through? Thank you.
So bridging that gap between the idea and bringing it into reality, the early stage stuff. Who wants to start with that?
Yeah, so I can talk with a bit of authority about this because this is an area that we get involved in quite a lot. And what I was kind of alluding to earlier in terms of funding for that early stage bootstrapping process. The reality is at the moment there is little or no funding out there. To get funding, you need to demonstrate a proof of concept, which is usually a TRL3, because at the moment you can't get funding for a blue sky idea. So what normally happens is you might have friends or family that might be able to help, or you might have a cohort of people behind this. But it's really, this is kind of an area that I believe that there should be more of an uptake in terms of funding. The best way to try and do this is frugally. So just think a bit in terms of an MVP, a minimally viable product, to demonstrate in its very basic form how it would work. And then you need to kind of, you know, in confidence, talk to potential manufacturers or distributors or surgeons to garner interest. If you can't get funding, then you can at least get testimonies from people. It depends how complex the innovation is, but if you could create a very rudimentary model and maybe demonstrate it in a box trainer or something, then you get that traction. But the very early stages of innovation is incredibly hard. And unfortunately, we see some really good innovations that have got potential that just don't make it because it's not got the funding in those early stages.
Thanks, Richard. I was just wondering, Ruth, would that fall within the purview of the...
Yeah, I would say talk to your colleagues in engineering or physical sciences over at Manchester, and maybe there's an opportunity there. Because, I mean, absolutely, if it's driven by a clinical need and it's your IP, but I don't know if you have an academic post as well as yet, or maybe need to find a collaborator who does, then it could certainly be within remit.
And just a completely sort of separate thought, I've seen things like this funded by hospital charities. If you have a really good idea, talk to a supervisor, talk to a senior clinical colleague. Access to special charities within hospitals, they are very good, particularly if you put forward a view that you're heading for a clinical entrepreneur program or you're heading for a fellowship or something like that. Usually they're very, I would suggest that the hospital charities or similar might be an idea. Okay, so we've got...
Yeah, thanks. Hemant Pandit, based in Leeds. There are two separate unrelated questions. First one is to Ian, Philippa, probably, and the second one is to Mark and Richard. So sometimes I get industry partners, and by the way, I have benefited a lot from NIHR, and I'm very grateful for that, and EPSRC funding indirectly as well. I do get industry partners who say, you know what, it is going to take up to 12 months for us to be successful if we work with you to apply for NIHR or EPSRC, and the chances of success are anywhere between 15 and 30%. It depends upon who applies. If I apply, it's 10%, David applies, it's 50%. So, but that's personal. So how do I convince that industry partner that it is beneficial for you to go through this, if money is not necessarily an issue for the industry partner? Because they want a quick fix, they want to go to the bigger market, global market. And while I've got the microphone, then therefore the second question is to Mark and Rich. Sorry, should I stop?
Let's do the first one.
Yeah, okay.
People are tired and short memory.
Yeah, you want to, why is it? It takes a long time, yeah. So I used to work for GE Healthcare, and lots of big companies, that everyone assumed I had loads of money. I actually got more money to give away now, or at least of the taxpayers' money, than I did when I was at GE. I used to tell people that GE used to make money out of selling light bulbs, so that tells you something about how they manage their money. So we didn't have very much money, and actually what happened was I ended up being told, this is too risky for us to fund, go and find some grant funding and some collaborators to do it. And lots of big companies are in that position. So things which are not central to what they do often are not going to get funded by the company, and so tend to be out a little bit. The time scales are not necessarily. I think if you're going to do it, want to do it quicker, you ain't going to come to NIHR mostly, unless you're going to get the small amounts of money.
I guess there's two ways well, there's three, but one is if you go through a classic competition through EPSRC, it can take anything from 4 months to 12 months, and sometimes it takes longer because we go through stages, and as you go through the stages, the success rate goes up. So we will, on occasion, give an option for you to then find your industry partner later on. So you warm them up, they don't seriously engage till they know it's looking a lot more serious. The second one, more pragmatically, is to encourage people towards where our centres and our hubs and our networks, and I mentioned if it's a plus or a hub, it's often got a partnership fund, and they're often intended to start to seed those new collaborations. And that won't fund big, but it will fund, hopefully, if the hub or the centre is agile, quick. So look to see where there's something that already has money that could be sort of a future collaborator, and you just need to make contact with them.
Good answers. Go on.
Could I just add for the PBIA? So I said we're going to have 2 calls per year, but we also have some agile funding in between for those times when there is a need to act quickly, because I think that's a problem. Well, we've both recognised previously is the timescales involved with these kinds of things.
Thank you. Heyman, your second question, very quickly.
Yeah, sure. So this is for Mark and Richard. If I am industry or I have a startup, whatever, how do you recoup your money that you have invested in me?
So for us, we have to find a liquidity event. So we buy shares in the business. We have to be able to sell shares in the business. So there are very few ways we can do that. We can sell it to a larger corporate, so you get to whatever stage of development it is that's necessary to be attractive to a bigger company, and then you sell. So that's an ideal solution for us because it's quite clean. You might take the company public, and then everybody has an ability to sell their shares, hopefully. So that's another option. Or, depending on where you get to, we might be able to sell it to a bigger fund. There's always bigger fish in the sea. So we call those secondary transactions. So maybe you've gone from, an early stage VC invests when you're doing the product development. By the time you're actually in market and making some sales, there's other sorts of investors that would come in when the risk profile is different to the one we took and effectively buy our shares off us. So we have to find one of there aren't, 20 answers I can give you. There's like those 3, basically.
Thank you. So from my perspective, I'm from industry, so I run a product design and innovation and sustainability consultancy. So when we see really good ideas, we might reduce our fees for that early stage. But what we're starting to do now is be more collaborative. So we'll go in with a bid. For example, Innovate UK, we've run a Design Foundations Innovate UK bid with a cardiac startup. We've also won I4I PDAs, thanks to Ian and the team. So for us, we're being a little bit more adventurous in terms of who we select at that early stage, because we're aware that if we collaborate with a potential project very early, that we'll stay with them all the way through. But it still comes down to risk. You know, for every 10 projects that we might back, probably one of them will be successful. So we've got to be very mindful as a, you know, industry, you know, commercial entity of what kind of horses we back.
Can I just make one other point on this, actually, which is quite important? Selling the company isn't necessarily a bad thing. So we are a purpose and impact investor. Part of our reason for being is to create high-value jobs in the north of England. And so we don't want to see that being lost. But there's lots of, you know, we're not misaligned to management teams. If they want to stay with something, it is not mutually incompatible that we could sell our shares and they could carry on running the business. So that is quite important, but it's about alignment of interests. So
it's not simple or linear. It never is. Thank you. Okay. V, question down there.
Yeah, Mike Rexworthy from Neotherics, MedTech SME. I guess this is to Mark primarily, but even at the later stages of commercialization, TRL 8 beyond, there's quite a lot of building blocks that still need to be put in place. I'm thinking of data rooms, due diligence, legals, etc. Where's the best place to look for that?
where's the best place to look for it in terms of as the company?
Yeah, to get that kind of funding to do those things.
I guess if we were invested in a company, then you've got it from us. So it should be part of the governance that comes with taking on board money. Pre that, my recommendation is you're obviously aware of what you've got to try and prepare for. So prepare as well as you can. It's a bit like a lot of things, isn't it? On the journey from startup through to, hopefully successful larger company. Certainly in the UK, it's likely historically that you're going to be slightly capital constrained. You can't do everything, so you have to do the best that you can. So it's not beyond, a company's capability at any stage to just be reasonably organised, to have good documentation, especially like in the medtech industry. You'd expect you to be pretty good at operating procedures and all the rest of it. So build your own data room. It can be as much as it's not to say it's Heath Robinson, but you don't need to buy an expensive commercial one to be fit for purpose to raise the next lot of money. And it's actually a really good point, which is one of the ways you can shorten the time frame it takes to try and raise money is to make the investor's job as easy as possible. So the more organised you are on that front, the more documentation you have. So when you do your 10 slide pitch deck, if you've got all the supporting evidence behind any assertion you make, it's just going to smooth the process. So I think the honest answer is, if you don't have the cash, do the best job that you can, and as you grow, the expectations will rise, and so that's probably the best answer.
Okay, happy with that? Good. That's good. That's grand. I've got one here, and then we'll take the question. V's just here. The question we had submitted in writing, believe it or not. I'm going to ask the funders this one, so you guys at this end. We already market a CE mark medical device. We've been approached by surgeons, right, so numerous times, to use this device off-label, i.e. not approved for use by the manufacturers for the use intended. Would you fund this device to be extended for its indications for use based on clinical need and surgeon's request?
Yes, I think the answer to that would be yes. We do fund reuse of or an extension, second uses for things. through Eye for Eye. You need to justify that in the same way. You need to explain the need and so on. But in principle, yes, we can do that, and we have done.
EPSRC might.
I think it depends what's involved. I mean, sometimes something that looks like a repurposing is non-trivial. It requires significant innovation and intellectual effort. It might need creativity. There's risk. If it's described as research, and it's research that peer review is likely to support, then give it a go. As I say, but do come and have a conversation. But the limitation we have is the person applying has to be an eligible person in an eligible institution.
It's remarkably similar to the answer you would get if you asked about repurposing medicines as well. Any clinical sort of review, any other views?
I think the key thing is how much you're straying from the original indications. Actually, a lot of the things that we use in clinical practice are sometimes subtly different to the licensed instructions for use, and we can run that through hospital governance processes to be sure that we have clearance to do that without needing the license to be updated. So I think it in part depends on how far you're straying from the original purpose as to whether you may need to do that or whether your surgeons could actually use it off-label with hospital support.
Surgeons would never use things without evidence base, would they? Like most of the stuff you use. If it's new, it's got different barriers to get over than if you already use. Sorry.
I have a quick question about I5. So, for example, the histosonic system now we are using as a research. Company sponsors in translation in renal cancer. But for example, if we want to use it in neurospace, and then we apply, the company is currently American company. If they have to have a registered UK address in order to apply for the product development grant award to expand the indication into the brain to do a feasibility study?
Right. The generic question there is, do we fund people outside the UK? The answer is the lead organisation needs to be UK-based, but we can put money into collaborators who are outside the UK. I think the question would normally come, and this is the committees that are making decisions around this will be looking at where the balance of funding goes. If 70% of the funding is going to the US because they want to develop their product, that isn't going to fly, and we might then expect them to come here. And I think if it is a US company's product, largely we'd probably want some sort of indication that they want to come and sell this to the NHS, and we're not just doing it so we can support them to sell it in their own market. But certainly you can do that if you've got a UK. We've had situations where like this before. In fact, some of the MICs have been supportive of technology coming from outside the country, which has very clear relevance to an unmet need in the NHS, and supported that as an application to be done. So yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy with that? Oh, good. We're not going to flog this to death. It's 5-5, right? Oh, David, God's sake, man.
Let me have the last question. So, Seamus, your introductory talk, you gave us some awful figures for funding in the north. So what I'd like to do to panel members to whom it's relevant is hear from them what they're doing in terms of levelling up funding.
Gosh, well, I showed a very sketchy map to show that we're a national funder, and most of our competitions are run on the basis of excellence and the specification that we agree in consultation. But we increasingly look for where we're supporting new partnerships, where we're joining up expertise. The map's quite misleading because we have a preference for a variety of reasons. We'll often give the grant to a lead institution, but actually we know it's working with a lot of institutions across the whole country. But we look at it and we look to see where we need to particularly give encouragement. We might go out and make sure that people know about the opportunities, where they're encouraged to apply, and things like the place-based innovation. But we're a national funder and we're excellence and impact driven.
I didn't answer the question. I'm joking. There is certainly intent there, right? How effective it's being, we'll see. Ian?
Yeah, in the same way as UKRI, NHR is very much an excellence-based. So the decision is going to be on the best applications, wherever they come from. What I can say is, so we want to see more applications, right, from you guys. I was in Northern Ireland the other day, and the same can be said there. They don't get very much of our, well, they're only just become eligible for it. They don't get very much of it because they don't apply enough. And we're going to try and help them. So we're doing as much as we can to help applicants, wherever they are, to do well. One example, well, I can tell you eye for eye, before the department said they wanted to move money from the NHR, do the levelling up thing. Are you allowed to use levelling up now? I'm not sure whether that's the right...
Don't call it the levelling
anyway.
up thing. It sounds it's being imposed on you. It's kind of a good idea for the country,
yeah,
shall
no,
we
I'm
say?
just, the terminology, I think, is the thing I was thinking about. I know, absolutely, I know it's... so we were already about 55% of our funding was outside the Golden Triangle. And it's probably going up slightly because quite a lot of the institutions in the north of the country and further outside of London, Oxford and Cambridge are doing a lot better in that kind of context. So we can't fund if it's not good enough. That's the challenge. So the challenge for us is to how we help you do better and how we provide support. One area where we are trying to do something very specific, and that is in terms of the new medical schools. So there's an activity in some of the areas where what you call new medical schools, they've been medical schools for a few years probably, but lots of them are in locations where they haven't got a long history of research. They're not in haven't got research intensive hospitals or indeed universities that have got lots of medical research. How do you get these guys onto the to take the next step up, like whether it's an HRC, certainly if it's a BRC, you're competing with people who've been doing this for a very long time. How do we help them with that? So there are some things going on to try and help some of those institutions, and many of those, almost all of those, are outside, well, obviously outside of the Golden Triangle. So there are some things that are very specifically trying to do that. Listen to the CMO, and he'll tell you, if you listen to what he's saying, I think what you'll see is policy will be moving a bit more in that direction, but it's quite difficult for us to do anything other than fund the best applications. So we just need to try and help you do a better job with the applications, or have a higher success rate, to get a higher success rate.
Okay. We're going to keep on at this because it really matters to the country, not just the.
I've not looked at the numbers very recently, but when we looked at it in some detail, there was a strong correlation between the numbers of active researchers and the amount of research funding, perhaps not surprisingly. So it also depends on how universities grow, how they sustain themselves, and who they employ, and who they can attract from the wider research community. And
there's also the correlation and cause there is very, very strong, because active researchers are only active if they have research grants and maintained by the university.
But I should say excellence was important, but we did look very carefully about where we placed our new centres for doctoral training, because we absolutely recognise the longer term effect that can have.
No, that's a good idea. Right. Last word, I think.
Okay, from an Innovate perspective, so in terms of help, we have regional managers which will help that. In terms of funding, I mean, actually Northwest, Northeast does actually okay. I can do it from a BMC perspective. You probably do second best to sort of the Southeast. Actually, it's not the North that has the issues when it comes to underfunding. Certainly based on companies applying, actually you don't do too badly. It's the bit in the middle and the West that actually don't do quite so well. So your assumption that you don't do well is incorrect from a BMC perspective.
Okay.
Which might surprise you.
We'll look at that.
If I was going to up an area, it wouldn't be...
The overall numbers, right? We can look at specific areas, but the overall numbers are pretty dire for the country, and the consequences of that for the economic development of big areas of the country need attention. That's the bottom line.
I think one caveat to this, David, is that there is quite significant funding coming into Yorkshire. Obviously, you've got the Innovation Arc in Leeds, and you've got the Olympic Legacy Park in Sheffield, and now Huddersfield. So I think that over the next 5 or 10 years, the infrastructure is there, but the interesting thing will be in terms of the levelling up agenda, whether the funding support will come on the back of that to help innovators to grow their particular projects.
And industry, the gap between industry funding in the Golden Triangle in the north is actually much narrower than public sector funding. So industry believes it and invests in the north to a much higher proportion than the government does. We're going to leave it at that. I started off by provoking that. One of the things you're asked to do as a keynote speaker is provide a provocation. You'll tell by my accent that I don't have any trouble with that sort of thing. So someone once said with a Northern Ireland accent, you can say they are father and sound aggressive. But one of the things that has happened over the course of the last 20 minutes is V has relaxed noticeably. So I think it's time to thank the panel, who have been really good sports. They've taken every question and answered it really honestly and openly, and I respect that immensely, so thank you. It's been a good discussion, and thank you for your questions. David, V,